What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, as you can see, we're going to be talking about the MVVM, otherwise known as the Model View ViewModel design pattern in iOS. So this has been requested time and time again. I've done a video on this quite a while ago, so I figured I'd do a more updated one, as well as a one that's put together a little better. So we're going to talk about this. We're going to take a look at implementing it with the basic example. We'll also talk about why this is a thing and why it's better than MVC in a lot of folks' opinions, as well as mine. So that all said, make sure you destroy the like button as per usual. Helps out with video engagement and the YouTube algorithm. Hit subscribe if you're a returning viewer. Get Xcode ready, get excited. Let's talk about some MVVM.
Quick pause before we get into the video. If you haven't seen it already, I am hard at work putting together iOSacademy.io, a community where all of us iOS engineers can come together, learn how to build some of the top apps like Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, in addition to interview prep to land some of these iOS roles at top tech companies. So if you're interested in the free and premium content to come, head on over to iOSacademy.io and enter your email address in the waitlist form, and you will be notified as content becomes available. That said, let's get into the video.
All right, so we're going to get started by opening up Xcode and creating a new project here. We'll stick with the app template, and I'm going to go ahead and call this MVVM example. Make sure your language is Swift, interface is storyboard, and lifecycle is UIKit. Go ahead and continue, and we'll save it to our desktop. And we're going to start off in the view controller file, but before we get there, once Xcode decides to stop being slow, like that, we're going to pick a simulator from our list up here. We'll stick with the 11 Pro Max. Go ahead and hit the run button. Let me expand this window a little bit to give ourselves a little more room to work. And the example we're going to be doing today is with a table view and custom table view cells. And the reason I think I went with that is it's a really common example and use case that's used both professionally and most probably in a lot of your guys' apps as well. So that said, let's pop into our view controller here. And I'm gonna bump up the font size so we all can see it. And let's get into it. So first things first, we want to create a table view on here. And we're going to set it up in the MVC architecture, so model view controller. So we've got our controller bit here. We're going to create a model right above it, and then we're going to create a custom table view cell, which will be our view. So we're going to start off with that, and then we're going to expand it to be MVVM, which is model view view model. So there's a new thing there, which is view model. We're still going to retain the controller. So cool. So let's create a simple table view on here. So we're going to create a table view as follows, just like this with an anonymous closure, and there'll be a UI table view. Go ahead and return the table just like that. We need to register a cell to it, so we're going to say UI table view cell.self, and the ID that's going to be used is cell. We're simply going to add it as a subview here, and we're going to assign its data source. We're going to also want to give it a frame of view.bounds, which is the entirety of this view controller. We'll get an error here in a quick second like that because we're not conforming to the protocol up here. So you want to go ahead and add conformance to the UI table view data source. And then there are two functions that are required that we'll need to bring in. The first one is number of rows. Let's just hard code that to 10. We'll get that from our models in just a moment. And the next thing is cell for row at index path. And here we're going to dequeue a cell with the identifier of cell for the given index path. We'll say cell.textlabel.text. Text. Oh no, autocomplete really likes to not cooperate half the time. .text, and we'll assign this to be hello world, and then finally go ahead and return your cell. So the error should go away. I know we didn't create the model yet. We will in a second. Just hit run to make sure that we've got our table view showing up. What I'm also going to do is let's pop into the main storyboard, And let me embed this inside of a navigation controller. So hit the controller here, come up to editor, and we want to go to embed in, if I can find it. Embed in, and we want to hit navigation controller. And let's give this a title. So select the title bar up here, the navigation bar, and we'll just go ahead and call this home. Hit Command R again, and you should have a navigation bar at the top of your controller. Cool, okay. So we've got our controller bit down. Our view in this case is the table view as well as this reuse table view cell. But we want to add a model to this, right? So we're going to create a struct. And this is going to be, let's call this an option. And we're going to say this has a title on it, which is basically just a string. Let's actually call this a person. Let's make it a little more realistic. And we'll give a property on here called name. And we're going to have a private var on here called models, which will be an array of person objects. And right here in view did load, we're going to say configure models, which will be a separate function. And you guessed it, in this function, we're going to set up our models and put them into that array we created. Now, number of rows is going to be models.count. And here we can say the text is going to be the text in the model. So it will say models or models, or model singular is from the models array at the given position. And here we can say model.name, just like that. And then in here, let me go ahead and create an array of names really fast. So we're going to say Joe, Dan, Jeff, let's see, Jenny, and Emily. And what I'll simply do here is in a simple for loop, I'm going to say for name in names, we're going to say models dot append a person with a name, and we'll just pass in the name there. That way we can get all these created. And if we go ahead and hit Command R now, we should now see our names in here with the appropriate number of cells. Beautiful. So cool. So we've got our controller down, our model. Now we want to separate the view as well as introduce a view model. So maybe I should have let off with this, but what the heck is a view model? So the purpose of MVVM is really to separate out individual concerns or responsibilities, even more so with model view controller. So a model, of course, is your data layer. You've got models that represent your data, wherever it's coming from, either the network or a database, what have you. You have a controller that's responsible for tying the model and the view together. And then you have a view in which you present that data in a GUI, right? Your user interface. So what's a view model? So a view model is basically an intermediate between the model and the view. So what happens oftentimes in larger applications is models get really large sometimes. So for example, we're going to stick with this person. And let's think about the Facebook app, right? So in Facebook's ecosystem, a person, and I'm going to go ahead and create these with optional values, a person has a ton of different properties on them. So a person can have, let's just call it a birth date actually. They can have a birth date, they can have a middle name, they can have, what else? They can have a address, they can have, well, I'll just add one more for the sake of brevity. They can have, let's say, a gender, which is of a type gender. And we'll just create a gender enum here of case male, female, or unspecified. And the point is, sometimes in a view, you don't necessarily want to show all of this data at once, right? So what you want to do is create another trimmer object that only has the model information that the view really cares about. And when the view model updates, we want to be able to update the view accordingly, right? So how do we do that? Quite frankly, it's fairly simple. So we're going to create a struct. Actually, before we even do that, let's take our cell and separate it out and create a custom cell. Let me also separate out these models. So I'm going to create a new file here, right click new file, and we're going to stick with a Swift file, and I'm going to go ahead and call this models. We'll just paste in our models in there just like that, fairly straightforward. And let me drag this file up so they're nice and organized. And let me create another new file. And this one's going to be a Cocoa Touch subclass, and it's going to be a custom subclass of a UI table view cell. And I'm going to go ahead and call this person following table view cell. And that name will make sense in just a moment. And let's go ahead and implement our table view cell here. So first things first, we want to give it an identifier like that. And we're going to override the initializer here, which is init with style. Oops, not that one. We want init with style. We're going to say super init with a style and a reuse identifier. We're also going to want to bring in the other required initializer with the NS coder here. We're going to also want to add layout subviews and override it. We're also going to want prepare for reuse. Prepare for reuse and call super prepare for reuse. This error should go away. It's just Xcode being dumb. Perfect. Okay. Now what we can do is go back to our view controller and let's actually use our new cell here. So here, instead of registering a normal table view cell, what we can go ahead and do, let's see, this error should go away, hopefully. Cannot find person in scope. Let's go ahead and hit Command B. That should go away. All right, cool. Looks like we still have an error somewhere. We'll take a look at it in a second, but let's register this cell for the cell name.identifier. And then wherever we DQ it down here, I see what the problem is here. We need to change the initializer, but wherever we DQ it down here in the cell for row function, what we want to go ahead and do here is DQ our cell with the new identifier. So we're going to say the cell name dot identifier. So what we've gone ahead and done now is we've separated out our view layer. So if we hop into our models file here, let me create a initializer, which only requires the name. And the reason I'm going to do this is because that constructor that we're using there in the view controller is going to continue to complain if we don't specify all the values. So I'm just going to go ahead and assign all of these to be nil. Looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's see what we've got going on. We've got middle name, address is an address. These are both strings, and this last one is gender of type gender. We'll default it to unspecified, and we can get rid of that last comma. And then in here, we can just say self. Actually, I can be lazy and copy and paste all of this. And let's get rid of that. Bear with me while I get rid of all this stuff. All right, so here we're gonna say self.name is name. All right, that looks good. We need to add one more curly here. That looks good as well. Let's get rid of this, and this, and this, and finally that, and we should be good, hopefully. We want to change this to be the appropriate property for each of these. Bear with me. All right, cool. So here we have our model. We should be able to compile now. Everything should be working. Looks like we have 3 errors still, so let's take care of these. Let's see what the issue is here. So here we're saying super init. This one should be reuse identifier. Looks like I messed up the autocomplete. I'm sure some of you guys are pulling your hair out as you saw me typing that. But now if we hit Command B, no errors, go ahead and run. You should see nothing different on your table view here. But we're going to make it different in a quick second. So cool, so we've talked about the controller here. We've separated out the view and our table view cell. We've got our model set up. Let's introduce a view model. So I'm going to create a new file here. It's going to be a Swift file. And generally the way I like to name model files is it's going to be the cell, rather the view that we're going to configure. So I'm going to call it person following table view cell view model. So person following table view cell view model. So kind of a long name, but this way it makes it fairly clear in your project what view the view model is backing. Let's put them side by side, just like that. And in here, I'm simply going to create a struct, which is going to have the same name. So what is this cell going to show us? So you might have guessed it by the name of it, but we're going to create a cell, which is pretty commonly seen in apps like Facebook and Instagram, where there's a person's image here, their username, maybe their name, their username underneath it, and then a follow button or an unfollow button based on the current state. So let's go ahead and set up this custom cell. So we're going to want to create 4 things on here. The first one is going to be a user image view, and this is going to be an image view. And I'm going to try to go through this fairly quickly because this video isn't really about custom cells, but bear with me. If you're not familiar with custom cells, I encourage you to watch my earlier video on it because it's helpful to get some context about kind of why we're setting up the custom cell. But we're going to say aspect fit, and then we're going to want 2 labels on here. So we're going to say the first one is going to be user name label. And this one I'm going to leave pretty basic. It'll just be a UI label, return label. And let me just give this a text color of secondary label, just like that. I'm going to be lazy and copy and paste this right above it. And this one is just going to be name label, text color of label. And then finally, we want the actual button to follow or unfollow. So I'm going to say private let button is a UI button. And this one is going to be a very standard UI button. And that's actually all we want to do because based on the view model, we're going to configure if it's a follow button or an unfollow button. Fairly straightforward. So let's go ahead and add all of these subviews. So here we can say content view, add subview, and we want to add all of these subviews we created. So there's 4 of them. So our 2 labels, our button and our image view. We are also going to say content view clips to bounds is true. And we want to give all of these subviews a frame. So first, let's do the image view. So we'll say the user image view dot frame is CGRect with the x of 5, 5, content view frame dot size dot height -10. And same thing for the height. I'm just doing these calculations pretty quickly at the top of my head, so bear with me. The name label is going to be, again, CGRect. The X is going to be, let me actually make this image width right here. We'll say image width is that, and then this is also going to be image width here. And here we're going to say X is image width plus 10, Y will be 0. The width here will be content view dot width minus, rather dot frame dot size dot width minus the image width. And the height is going to be content view dot frame dot size dot height over 2. So that's that label. Just copy and paste it once. Let me align all of these properly. Then we want the username label right below it. So we're going to say the username label is going to be the exact same, but the Y here is going to be halfway down. So content view frame size height over 2, just like that. And then finally, we want the button itself. So the button is going to be CGRect with the X, Y width and height. The X is going to be content view frame size width minus 120. The Y will go ahead and say is 10. The width is going to be 110. And the height here we'll say is content view frame size height minus 20. So I know we just did a bunch of math there. Hopefully that's all correct, and hopefully you guys can just go ahead and copy all this stuff out. Let's go ahead and run this now, and let's see what we get. We're actually not going to see anything different on the screen. What we will make sure is that things are compiling. So now what we want to do is let's go set up our view model a little bit more. So we created this view model file right here. And in here, if you think about it, what do we need to actually render out our cell? Well, the first thing we need is a name. Then we want a username. Then we want a currently following, right? Which is going to be a Boolean. So this will basically specify if the user that's viewing this list is currently following that user. And then finally, we're going to want a let's see, we're going to also want an image. We'll just call it an image for the sake of simplicity. It might be an image URL in a real view model, but since we're not using any backend service, we'll just go ahead and, whoops, let's get rid of this. We'll just go ahead and call it a UI image for now. And this is basically everything that we need to render out our cell. So how do we actually use this? We can now go to our cell. And in here, we're going to have a function. And this function is going to be configure with ViewModel. And quite simply in here, we can say name label dot text is ViewModel dot name. And let me go ahead and start copying and pasting this 3 times. Next one we're going to say is the username label text, the user image view dot image. And here we can say username, here we can say image. And then finally, what we can do is we can say if ViewModel currently following, we want to show an unfollow button. Otherwise, we want to show a follow button. So we can say, in this case, button, set title, unfollow for state normal. And we can also say button, set title color. It's going to be black for state of normal. And let's see, what else do we want to do? We probably want to give the button a border so we can actually see the edges of it. So we'll say button dot layer dot border width is 1, button dot layer dot border color is UI color, black dot CG color. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this stuff to the other state. So if currently following is false, we want to show a follow button. So we'll say follow, and this one actually was supposed to be black, not blue. And in this case, the title color will be white. So you can see here is based on the view model, we're configuring the view stuff. So the view has no knowledge of the actual backing model here from which this data is coming, presumably some model that's coming from our like API call or something like that. So we'll say in that case, background color is link, which is just a flat blue colors. Go ahead and hit Command V to make sure everything is still compiling. And now what we want to do is in our view controller to actually use this model, we're going to first want to say guard the cell, and we want to try to cast it to the appropriate cell type. And if we're not able to cast it as such, we're just going to return a basic table view cell. And now here we can use that configure function, right? We can configure with the view model, but we want to create a view model from our model. So we're going to say person follow view cell. And here, if we try to, rather view model, if we try to create this, we have to create it with all this info. But we want to actually create it with our model. So I'm going to say with and pass in the model there. Now the next thing you can clearly tell is we need a way to use a person to create one of these view models. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to create a constructor on this with model of type person. And just for the sake of this video and an example, we're going to say that the name is model.name. The, whoops, spell this correctly. We're going to say username is model.username. username, and I'm aware that we don't have a username on here yet, so let's go ahead and just add a default one. So we're gonna say var username is, I don't know, Kanye West, and realistically it would be configurable in the initializer, but for the sake of not being redundant, I'm just gonna add it here directly like that, and go ahead and hit Command B, and that should be compiling. And let's see, we still need to add the other two here, so we're gonna say currently following is going to be false. And here we'll go ahead and say the image is a UI image, and I'm going to use a system image of type person. So cool. So go ahead and hit Command B now. Let's see if we have any errors. So no errors. Let's go back to our view controller. And the really important takeaway here is that the view model is created via the model. And let's say we made any change on our view. So for example, the user taps a button and it follows the user. We want to propagate that information back to the model. And the reason is because the next time we render the model, we want to show the appropriate view. So a follow button versus unfollow. And the view model needs to know what it needs to render given the current state. So before we get into any of that, let's go ahead and hit Command R. And you'll start seeing here now that we see follow buttons, we see the person, we see the name, and it looks like we don't see a username. So let's see what gives on our cell, why we don't see the username. So let's go back to our cell and let's double check this stuff. So let's see, looks like we're adding the username. We're adding the username image view twice, where we wanted to add the username label. Username label, that's what we want. Let's go ahead and try that one more time. Cool, so now we have our name, our username, the image view, as well as the button. So right now, tapping the button, nothing happens, right? So how do we get this information back to our model to create our view model correctly the next time? We're gonna use a delegate to do that, but before we do that, in this prepare for reuse function, every time a cell is reused, we wanna reset all these properties. So I'm gonna say name label.text is going to be nil, username label.text is going to be nil, user image view dot image is going to be nil, and we also want to reset that button. So we're going to say button, its background color is going to be nil, and I'm also going to say button dot layer dot border width, or we just say border width is going to be 0. And then we also want to change its title. So we're going to say set title will be nil for control state of normal. So this will reset our button every time. Now we want something to happen when the button is tapped. So we can basically bind the action to our model. So we're going to introduce a delegate here. So we're going to say protocol person following table view cell delegate of type any object, so it can be weak. And here we're going to say func person following table view cell. We're going to pass in a reference of it of the same type, just like that. We're going to say did tap element, or did tap with view model. And you guessed it, the type here is going to be the same type here plus view model, just like that. And on the cell, we're going to introduce a weak property for the delegate. And this is how we're going to convey the data back to our controller. Now, notice that we pass in the view model into our actual function here. So whenever we call this configure function, one thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and save, or rather retain the view model onto this cell. So I'm going to create private var of view model here, and the type of it is going to be the view model type, and it'll be optional. And the reason we want to do this is because we're going to now add a action to our button, just like this. So we're going to say the selector is did tap button, and we don't want the view to necessarily know what we're doing on the tap. In this case, it'd be changing the state of following. So we're going to relay all that information back to the actual controller. So here we can say, make sure the view model is not actually nil. So we're going to bind it with a guard, and we can say delegate person following table view cell self did tap with the view model. So let's see if these errors go away. So it looks like they all went away. And now that we have this delegate relationship on here, on the view controller, what we can go ahead and do is for this cell, we can say its delegate is self. And we just need to conform to that new protocol here. So we're going to say extension on the view controller, and we want to extend the delegate here and implement that function we added. So in here, what we're going to go ahead and say is if viewModel.currently following, we want to go ahead and update its actual value. So there's a couple ways you can go ahead and do this, right? So either you can update the model value here, or one thing you can do is if we command click into this, we can actually make this currently following mutable by making it a var. So one thing we can do is if we come back to our view here, whenever this button is tapped, we can create a copy of the view model. So let's do this. Whoops. So here we're going to say this is the view model. And then what we can do is var new view model is a copy of our view model. Now keep in mind it's a struct, so it's not a reference type, it's a value type. And we can say the new view models dot currently following is going to be the inverse of view model currently following. So if this is true, this will now be false. If this is false, this will now be true. And in this delegate function, we can actually go ahead and pass in the new view model. And here in the controller bit of it, we can actually go ahead and save this into our data source suppliers. In this case, it would be this array of models, right? I'm not gonna actually do that because the video has already gone fairly long. But one thing that I'll also mention here is now that we have gone ahead and changed this view model, we can actually call this configure function again. So here we can now say configure, and we can pass in the new view model. So here we can also say prepare for reuse. So this will reset the cell, and then we can configure with the new view model. So let's go ahead and just hit Command R, hit the play button to build and run. And let's see what happens when we hit this. We can see that it changes every single time that we click it, which is pretty nifty. And not only are we doing this in a reusable way where all we're doing is we're mutating the view model based on user interaction here, but we're also relaying it back to our view controller. And our view controller can now take that information and do what it wants with it, right? So in a real app like Facebook, maybe that's making a network call to save that information to our backend. So I know this video is going fairly long, but I just want to recap really quickly. All we really did here is we have a controller that has a basic table view. We have a person model. So it's super important that you understand that this is the actual model where the majority of the data lives. This is the data layer part of it, right? And then we have a custom cell that we created. This is a subclass of a table view cell. And then the new thing here, which is the root of all of this stuff, is a view model. And by definition, this is something that has, this is a type of a model rather that has all the information to render a view. Nothing more, nothing less. So in this case, we created with the model. Now notice the model had things on it like birth date, age, and all that other stuff that the view basically doesn't care about. Therefore, we don't want the view model to necessarily have it. Then on the actual table view cell itself, we configure it with the view model. Let me see where it is, right down here. And we also go ahead and save that view model. And the reason we do is because whenever we tap the button, we mutate the view model because now that we've changed state, we want to re-render the view. We re-render it, and then we also notify the controller via the delegate that, hey, the view model went ahead and changed, you might want to update stuff. And that's how you can get this to work. And that's architecture, which is fairly clean and separates out your concerns in the grand scheme of things. So notice you can click back and forth, and this is really, really simple for the most part once you get the hang of it, and extremely commonly used across iOS design patterns. So hopefully that all made sense. I know it was kind of a lot. Definitely leave comments down below for any questions, clarifications, feedback, concerns. Love hearing from you guys. Would love to help you out as much as I can. Make sure you destroy that like button as per usual for the YouTube algorithm. Helps out with all the videos and future videos quite a bit. Hit subscribe while you're at it if you enjoyed this video and are excited for daily uploads. I try to upload almost every single day, Swift videos, iOS, some Objective-C thrown in there, this and that. Thanks for watching. I will catch you guys in the next video.